The idea of not just going to Mars, but becoming a multiplanetary species and living on Mars is becoming more and more feasible. In fact, Elon says that best case scenario, he sees us there in about 5 years, and worst case, he says, is at the end of the decade, which could still be a little bit too optimistic. However, Mars is definitely, well, not a welcoming place at the moment. In fact, I wanted to talk to an expert, and the person who originally got me interested in astronomy, my former professor from Loyola Marymount University, Professor Van Biezen. When I was his student, he had just started making YouTube videos. He was making videos every single day, he still is. And now his channel has grown to almost 1 million subscribers. He teaches all sorts of subjects, but being in his astronomy class with an English degree, I really didn't have to take that class. But he inspired me so much that I took not 1, but 2 semesters of astronomy from him. So I was recently in sunny Los Angeles and I wanted to stop by and see him after about 7 years of being out of college now and talk to him about the prospect of going to Mars and living on Mars.
You have to have the vision. You have to have the will and the vision, and obviously Elon Musk has the will and the vision. He wants to make this happen, and he is a person that could make this happen. But he's going to need a lot of very intelligent, smart people to put the actual plan together and make it work. And that's the challenge right there. The vision is easy, making it work is hard.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Mars has an average distance of 140 million miles. It's one of Earth's closest habitable neighbors. And Mars is really cold, but SpaceX has a plan to warm it up. The Mars atmosphere is primarily carbon dioxide with some nitrogen and argon and a few other trace elements, which means that we could grow plants on Mars just by compressing the atmosphere. Gravity on Mars is only about 38% of that on Earth, so you would be able to lift heavy things and bounce around. And the length of the Mars day is pretty close to Earth as well.
I think it's very adventurous to try and make it to Mars. I hope that they will get there in my lifetime. I would love to see that. However, there's some huge challenges to overcome. The one thing that people don't realize is getting there is not as difficult. Coming back is virtually impossible. So at this point, anyone that goes to Mars will not come back. So keeping that in mind, that is a huge obstacle, of course. And yet, even though people know that they are not able to come back yet, there's still plenty of people ready to go.
Oh yeah. Some people want a one-way trip away from Earth. I mean, I believe that.
But so that's one problem, is that you cannot come back. So that means that they need constantly to be supplied with everything that they need, and there's virtually nothing on Mars that's usable. So there's no water on the surface. Now there's places you can find ice. You could potentially melt that down for water. There's no oxygen on Mars, so you'd have to produce that. There's lots of carbon dioxide, but there's no oxygen. So you need a lot of energy, because energy is what's required to produce anything else that you want. So if you want to produce water, you want to produce oxygen out of what's available, you're going to need energy. And so all that needs to be transported to Mars. There's virtually nothing in Mars that can keep you alive in any way.
Of course, with a fully reusable rocket like Starship, Elon Musk plans to refuel the Starships in low Earth orbit first, and then again on the surface of Mars for their return to Earth. During the first phase, he plans to launch several Starships to transport and assemble a propellant plant and start to build up a base. This plant would produce methane and liquid oxygen from subsurface water ice and the atmospheric carbon dioxide. I wanted to talk to an expert. His name is Paul Hintze, and he is a NASA chemist, and he is very familiar with the Sabatier process, this process that would take carbon dioxide and change it into rocket fuel. So here's a little bit of our discussion.
You know, it's difficult because it takes so much propellant, and you have to ship the propellant both ways. And so in space, you have to, accelerate propellant to get it to go to a place, and then you actually have to use propellant to slow it down when you get to the place that you want. It takes an awful lot of mass, like on the ground on Earth, to get you to Mars and to get you back. So if you can make the propellant on Mars, that cuts a significant amount of mass that you need. Now, it means you have to actually have a chemical plant that makes it on Mars. But really, that technology isn't that difficult. So Mars has a CO2 atmosphere. It's about a 200th of the pressure of ours, but it has CO2. There's water on Mars, so you can get the water. You can split the water, you can get hydrogen. With hydrogen and carbon dioxide, you can make methane through the Sabatier reaction. We did an end-to-end system that collected CO2 from a simulated Mars atmosphere and then processed it through a Sabatier reactor and converted it into methane. The chemistry is pretty straightforward. People do it on Earth. It's been around for quite some time. It's just, how do you do it on Mars? And, the challenges are, well, if something breaks, you can't fix it because, there's nobody there. The atmosphere is very different. Simple things like heat transfer are complicated. So, Mars has an atmosphere, but it's not as much. Our electronics, my computer has a fan right now, and I hear the fan blowing to keep it cool. It can do that because there is an atmosphere on Earth that cools it. So we blow air over the things that are hot. On Mars, since the atmosphere is so less dense, you don't have that. So things like that are challenges. How do you keep the reactions at the right temperature? So those were the kind of things we thought about and did, but mostly we were just trying to show end to end you could do this. So you could make methane from everything you have on Mars.
Again, thank you to Paul for letting me reach out to him on Twitter and interview him. It is always such a delight to reach out to people and have them be receptive to being interviewed for Ellie in Space. I really think that it's great to, have more diverse interviews on the Ellie in Space channel, and I really hope that you guys enjoy it. And just a big thank you to everyone. Sorry, my cats are jumping around. To everyone who says yes to being interviewed, because it's time out of their day, and I really, really appreciate it. Tell us about Mars. I mean, it's cold.
Mars is my favorite planet. Definitely, when you think of all the planets in the solar system, Mars is the most interesting. Especially, it's tantalizing because once upon a time, Mars was very much like the Earth. It had a large ocean, it had rain, it had an atmosphere, it had clouds. It was very much like Earth. One of the reasons why we think we might be able to find life on Mars is because the conditions for life once existed. The atmosphere has disappeared, essentially. There's just a little bit of it left, so most of the atmosphere has leaked off into space. Because of that, the atmospheric pressure is so low that water can essentially not exist in liquid form. So if you were to take a bucket of water and you were to pour it on the surface, it would instantly begin to boil, essentially evaporate, and it's probably cold enough where it would also begin to freeze at the same time. So you'd have a process of freezing and boiling essentially at the same time, and the water would either end up in a frozen form partially and be evaporated. And because of that, Mars is extremely dry.
Yeah.
So it went from a situation where it had lakes and rivers and rain and oceans to this barren place where life is non-existent in any form, shape that we know of. We have not yet found any evidence whatsoever that life has ever existed on Mars. On top of that, it's a beautiful planet. It has enormously geographical features. It has this enormous canyon, Val Marineris, which is like their big Grand Canyon that stretches out for 2,500 miles. We have this huge plate of volcanoes. We have all kinds of enormous scenery, and obviously with the rovers that are going around taking pictures, and we've seen the beauty of that planet. So it's very tantalizing to go there and explore it, but it's a very hostile environment. To go to Mars as a humanity, for humanity to go to Mars, we can send robots, we can send rovers, we even have a little helicopter now on Mars. That's the best way to explore it. It's obviously the safest, the easiest, the cheapest, and the most effective. We can cover a lot of the planet using robots and using all kinds of modern equipment now that we have to go visit the planet. Bringing people to Mars, obviously, that's the exploration sense, right? We love to explore. We've gone to the deepest part of the ocean, we've gone to the moon, we've gone to the highest point on Earth. People love to explore things. Is Mars explorable? And yes, to some extent it is. It's going to be very difficult to get people there, and obviously way more difficult to get them back. But I think one day we'll have enough technology, enough capability to make it happen, to make it for real. And I think we're going to be able to set up a base on the surface of Mars and be able to have people there for a while. And if we keep resupplying it, we can keep them for a long time. Obviously, you need spare equipment, you need to be able to fix things when they break down. I mean, it's a complicated situation. But yeah, exploring Mars would be fantastic. And I'd like to see it one day, in my lifetime. The lower gravity is going to affect you somewhat, but not as much as actually traveling there, because when you travel there, you're weightless. And so human beings are going to be weightless for the duration of the trip to go to Mars. It takes about 6 months to get to Mars, so you're 6 months weightless, and we already know that has tremendous detrimental effects on humans to do that. So once they're there and they're back in the situation of gravity, they could recover some of that health loss that they will have experienced. That's probably not the biggest concern. I think people could live on Mars in lower gravity. It's about 1/3 the gravity on Earth. But just the fact that there's nothing there. You need food, you need water, you need to be able to go to the bathroom, you need to be able to clean yourself, you need to, I mean, there's so many things. People will get sick, people need medical attention, we'll need medicines, we'll need, you name it, there's an unending list of things you're going to need, and nothing is on Mars. So everything needs to be supplied. So I think the supply line needs to be taken care of. And they've actually talked about sending things to Mars years before people would arrive to get all the equipment there, get the modules there. But once you're there, you need the equipment to move things around. You need things to lift. Again, all that needs to be thought of, how that's going to be done.
Right.
How are you going to get the modules there? How are you going to get them together? How do you get enough oxygen there? How do you get enough heat there? Because you need to keep it warm. It's very, very cold on Mars. As I sit here and think about it, I can see this multitude of challenges you need to overcome. So,
I mean, we know that Elon Musk thinks that we'll get there within the next decade. Do you think that that's realistic?
If they're not concerned about coming back, it's probably realistic. Yeah, I think we have the technology to do it. The question is, of course, it would be deemed a failure when you send people there. They would be dying within weeks or months after arrival. You want them to survive. And so I think you need to put a lot of things into place to make it a reality.
What do you think is more important, becoming multiplanetary or, you know, saving the Earth, focusing here?
So
what we got.
Yes. So when I look at a movie like Interstellar, where the concept there is that the Earth is dying, we need to find another place to go live. And I would say that the challenges of being able to adapt to another, first of all, finding a place that would be suitable for life would be extremely difficult. It's probably 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000 planets may be suitable for life. And then it would not be as perfect as the Earth. The Earth is just about as perfect as you can imagine, as far as being able to host life. Even an Earth that is dying would be much more hospitable than another planet that is in a vibrant part of its life. Because, again, the conditions are unlikely to be the same and as hospitable as here. The Earth conditions are absolutely amazing for life. And to be able to find another planet like that, we haven't done so yet. We haven't found another planet like Earth.
But it's also like one of those, it's going to take so long to do it. We got to get started at some point, right?
You know, I think it's like back in the old days when they traveled to the Arctic and the Antarctic. Matter of fact, when I was a little boy, that was one of the most fascinating stories to read up on the explorers that went to the Arctic and went to the Antarctic. And why did they do it? They want to explore. People, I think, want to explore things. You know, they want to be able to push the boundaries of possibilities. I think it's in our nature to do so. We do that in science, we do that in technology, we do that in so many ways, including exploration. I think there's a lot of people out there just itching to make it possible to go back to the moon, and I think they're making plans to do that, to go back to the moon, and then eventually, from that experience with the new technology, learn how to go to Mars. And I think it's inevitable. I think people are going to do it because it's there.
Right.
Why do you climb the mountain? It's there. Why do you want to go to Mars? It's there. You want to try it.
Do you see the value in setting up like a permanent presence on the moon?
The value would come in getting experience of what that would be like, because essentially they would have to do that to go to Mars, and the moon is a lot closer.
Yeah.
We can come back from the moon. We've done it. We are able to come back from the moon. The moon is much smaller, so the gravitational force is much less, and we can get off the surface a lot easier than we can from Mars. Mars is bigger. So we need more fuel to get off the surface of Mars and to get enough speed to get away from the gravitational force of Mars. On the moon, it's not nearly as big a problem. And so we can supply and come back to the moon. We can learn from that, then to go to the next step to Mars, where supplying Mars and coming back from Mars would be a lot more difficult. So from a learning experience, it's absolutely essential. I would not want to go to Mars without having had the experience of what it's like to set up a base on the moon.
Why is it impossible now to come back from Mars? Is it just the fuel to get home?
Yes, so it's at this point it would be having enough fuel. So I don't know if most people, they may not realize how difficult it is to land on Mars. About half the spacecraft that have ever tried have crashed into Mars. Now that was earlier more so than later, but still, even today, we still have spacecraft that are not successful in reaching the surface. They somehow crash, because it's very difficult to land on Mars because it has a little atmosphere, which doesn't slow you down. And so you need fuel to slow you down. So it takes an enormous amount of fuel and effort to slow you down to land on Mars. And then you have to have a lot of fuel to get back off the surface. So you have to land that fuel on Mars, unless you can make it yourself. So the idea would be, hey, let's make our fuel while on Mars. But how do you do that? And how do you load that into the spacecraft? How do you keep it safe? It's still, as I'm sitting here, it would be very challenging to get off the surface because you need enough fuel. You need enough fuel to get into orbit of Mars. And then you need enough fuel to get away from the orbit of Mars, back to the gravitational force of the Earth. It's all about getting enough fuel there. And if you ever take a look how big the spacecraft are when they start from the Earth, they're huge cylinders, 300 feet high. They're almost completely filled with fuel in order to get away from the Earth. You have to have a similar process to get away from Mars.
Is that, do you think the hardest problem we'll ever have to solve is just getting to Mars and getting back? I mean,
I think the hardest problem we'll have to solve is how to live in peace on the Earth.
the truth comes out. I think you're right.
How do we live in harmony and peace on Earth is probably the most challenging. Yes, it's strange. I think that should be a big topic of discussion among people is what would it take?
Right.
Because if we could do that, we could take so many of the resources that we're now using for strife against one another. We could use those resources to do amazing things with it.
Right.
But technologically, it's probably one of the hardest things we've ever done. What we can do today is just absolutely fantastic, and I love watching the videos of the pictures and the movies. They put them together and they make movies as if you're traveling through on the surface of Mars. It's just amazing. It's amazing what we've been able to discover. And it all started by the attempts back in the 1960s of getting to the planet, flying by it. The first several missions didn't even make it into orbit. We're making progress. Don't forget that when you see these landings on Mars and these rovers traveling on the surface, it's on the back of decades and decades of various attempts as we slowly learn. And as you learn, you then go to the next stage and you just keep doing that. So it's all about experience, learning, and one of the reasons why we have to go back to the moon is the technology we used in the 60s to get to the moon is all gone. It's lost. It's the capability and knowledge of the people who did that, they're no longer here. We need to relearn all that. Obviously, with new technology, we're going to do a better job. But don't underestimate the experience of the people that went before us. If we can lean on that and learn from that, it gets us a lot closer. And so that's learning about how they did it back then and how we can adapt to that.
Yeah, I feel like we're so overdue to go back to the moon. I mean, it's crazy how long it's been.
It's been over 50 years since the first landing on the moon, and it's been about 48 or so since the last landing on the moon. So it's, imagine a half a century. Most of us were not alive when people walked on the moon.
And some people believe it didn't even happen.
It didn't happen, that's right. I get that asked in the astronomy classes sometimes.
Really?
The students on the first day, they will ask, and I'll ask them, do you have any questions before we start? And they go, yeah, did the moon landing actually happen? Is it real? It's, and you can't blame them because there's so many things that we're told that are not real.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard to figure out what's real and what's not. So,
right. Wow.
Yeah, can't blame him for that question at all, but I can assure you it was real.
Yeah, what's some astronomy myths that you have to debunk a lot? Other than that one, obviously.
Well, the moon landing and the flat earth are the two that are, yes. And I get it all the time. I get questions on the videos all the time where they say, how can you have an atmosphere and then space with no atmosphere? How is that even possible? Well, there's obviously an answer for that. We have the gravitational force pulling the atmosphere towards the Earth. If it wasn't for that, the atmosphere, of course, would float into space. But that's why you can have no atmosphere and atmosphere. And of course, it changes slowly as you go further up. But that explanation isn't sufficient for them. They say, oh, no, we don't believe that. And so, yeah.
Wow. Great. I think I've asked you, I mean, I could ask you questions all day, but yeah, thank you.
It is a fun topic, right?
It is.
It's a lot of fun.
It is. Yeah. You inspired me so long ago. I mean, I got an English degree, so I did not have to take astronomy, for the record.
But you're glad you did.
I loved it. That's why I took a second semester. I was like, I love it. So
yeah, great.
Yeah, I think we should all be excited about it, you know? I mean, it impacts all of us.
You know, we sometimes get so wrapped up in our daily lives that we don't look up and realize there's this enormous universe out there with all these secrets and all these adventures out there.
Right.
Yeah.
So we should look up. That movie is wrong. We should look up.
We should look up. Yeah, that's the wrong title. Do look up and enjoy space. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I really hope that you enjoyed that conversation with my former professor. He is just such a great guy, and it was so cool to see him again, especially as so much has changed in both of our lives, and definitely excited for the future and going to Mars. I definitely think this is something that we can achieve in our lifetime and his lifetime, like you heard him. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And I wanted to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters. Your support means so much. I have a lot of fun stuff planned for 2022, including an interview with Scott Manley in person. So yeah, you won't want to miss that one. So make sure to tune in and hit that bell notification if you're really feeling it. I will see you guys very soon.